To say that I'm fascinated with the weather is kind of an understatement, but I certainly think many of you are as well. Eric Hunt is back with us from the University of Nebraska. He's a meteorologist, also an extension educator. Eric, good to have you back. Thank you so much, first, for coming to see us when we came to Lincoln. And then you came over and saw the show in person. What were those two experiences like? You have to say nice things about us first. That's really what that is.
I really enjoy them. Well, you're showing Lincoln, the NET building, or the Nebraska Public Media building, as it's called now, is literally just north of where I have my office on campus. So that was really convenient. And then, yeah, I was doing a workshop in Iowa City on a Friday morning, and you invited me to come in. And yeah, it was Matt Bennett came on and did the markets. And I thought that was really interesting. I'm not an economist, but I do enjoy hearing about what's going on in the agricultural sector economically, financially.
Well, and again, it's just being a full service. I mean, that's what extension is and education is you're trying to how it all fits together, because it's not just one or two things that a farmer is thinking about at any given moment.
Oh, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. First, I want to say also that I did some driving earlier in this week, and I went down to St. Louis and back, and I didn't see but one field that was struggling in that area. Everything looked fantastic. I know rain has been an issue in your state. We're going to get to the rain, the wind, but the rain can lead to, well, this is the time of year when diseases start to pop up. We start to see the crop scouting, and we can still maybe do something about it. What's going on with diseases in your world?
Well, what I've been hearing is just from educators that cover, so I cover the whole entire state. A lot of educators actually have their own focus areas, their own counties. What I've been hearing from some of them is that soybean gallonage has been an issue. Weed streak on wheat's been a real big problem this year. Now, that's because of hail from last season, so that kind of gives you a double whammy. The other thing that I've heard about tar spot. So there's actually been several reports already in the state, relatively low concentrations, mind you, I think. But the fact that it's already showing up, particularly in the southeastern portion of the state, that's not a good sign. It's early.
And you have ways that Nebraska Extension can help?
Absolutely. So we have a wonderful plant and pest diagnostic clinic here on East Campus. And matter of fact, we serve Nebraska very well. We also are willing to take in samples from anybody in the country. So I know Iowa State and Illinois, I think all the land grant schools probably have their own clinics. But if you're outside Nebraska, you're welcome to ship stuff to us. It's like $25. Kyle Broderick will take good care of you. They do a really, really good job. They usually can turn stuff around really quickly. What they'll do is they'll get under the microscope and really just determine exactly what it is, and they can give you recommendations on how to treat it, because you don't want to apply fungicide to something that's bacterial or vice versa, because you don't want to waste your money.
Right. And we all know that every cent counts trying to raise a crop right now. What they could do, Eric, is just throw that thing into the air, and the wind would probably take it across. You and I setting up this conversation, I said one of the things I really want to talk about is the wind. Last weekend, at least in Iowa, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and to an extent a lot of Monday, I don't remember a wind like that, constant, day and night, for quite some time. Then my kids said, wow, our dad is old. He now is obsessed about the wind. Was I crazy?
No, I got more comments about this wind is crazy. Yes, it was. And that's something that we've seen more of in the last 20, 30 years. I haven't done this analysis for any other state besides Nebraska, but we definitely have seen a rapid increase in the number of days with high wind gusts over 30, not that 30 miles an hour is an obsessively high wind gust, but that number of days has gone up. And essentially what happened last weekend, we had strong area of high pressure in the southeast. We had low pressure to our northwest, and we just had a very open corridor. What was more unusual about it, though, is that it was also, especially once you got further east, it was pretty humid. And it's like usually if it's that windy, usually humidity is a little bit better because you're mixing down some drier air. But I think it's because there was so much latent moisture around. It's been very, very wet across the south. So we were bringing up moisture from areas that are very wet. So you have places that had some just kind of really unique, what we call all-time parameter spaces. So Daryl Hersman, that runs the Iowa Environment Mesonet website at Iowa State. Wonderful website. Check it out if you get a chance. But he was just looking at some of these sites like in Iowa and Illinois and Nebraska had combinations of temperature, humidity, and wind speeds that we really have never seen before. And I know it was just constant for 3 days. We actually lost power at our house for about a little over an hour on Sunday afternoon, which was not great because it was like 95 degrees. It had been about 100 the 2 days before that. And I took a look at potentially evapotranspiration rates from the mesonet sites around the state, and almost every site had at least an inch and a half in the 3 days. Some sites in south central, southwestern Nebraska, where it was a little bit hotter, had over 2 inches. That doesn't mean you actually lost 2 inches out of the soil profile, but I think it's suffice to say that we lost a lot of soil moisture in this part of the country in the last 3 days. So we didn't need 7 inches of rain in 6 hours that some places got, recently. But the rain that we did get here recently has been very beneficial in terms of recharging what we lost. So you can lose a lot of moisture when you have that kind of wind for several days.
We'll get into the moisture in a moment. Let's stick with the wind just again. You had said something about wind gusts we've seen more reports. There's this chart here that says number of days with wind gusts over 30 miles an hour from 1980 to 2020, now current, going up. Any idea why?
Well, I think a lot of that just is kind of a result of our planet's warming. So we are seeing a little bit stronger ridging at times in the summer. And if you get a decent trough that gets into the western United States, it's going to open up a corridor for more wind speeds in this part of the country. Now, Nebraska's always been a relatively windy place, and Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois could probably attest that as well. But if you look at that chart, you go back to the mid 1970s, and we had some higher wind speeds in the 70s, and then we had about a 10, 15-year period where we weren't quite as windy. In the last 20, 30 years, we've had a lot of days with higher wind gusts, and that's including during stretches of time where we were actually getting relatively good moisture. But I think the moral of that story, though, is that even if you are getting good precipitation, if you have a 4 or 5 day stretch where it's hot and windy, you can really take down your profile pretty quickly. I was actually thinking back to June of 2020, where we had now it wasn't as windy during that week stretch in June of 2020 as it was this last weekend, but it was enough that I think it really drew down soil moisture in western Iowa, northeastern Nebraska, and they never really ever fully recovered from that. And I think that was kind of the catalyst for the drought that started that summer, was that stretch of warm, windy days. And it continued in the overnight hours.
Well, and we had these, I think, spring, early summer. We've had wind before. I mean, not just gusts, but just long sustained winds. I think at one point, even in March, we were saying, or April, it was the windiest year so far, windiest start to a year or something like that. Right? Did I hear that right?
Yeah, I don't know about January, February. I don't think we're exceptional for wind. March was off the charts for winds, or at least wind gusts across pretty much anything between the Rockies and the Appalachians. April wasn't as bad. I think the mid-spring wasn't as bad as it maybe has been in some years, but certainly what we had this last weekend was almost unprecedented.
Yeah, it was crazy. And you mentioned the soil moisture lost and the profiles that have changed over time here. The wind, yes, soils get dry in June and July naturally, but the wind just sucks it out. We had this rain. There was a chart I saw from a farmer friend Friday that was right after the rain. He's like, we need some heat. Well, we got the heat, we got the wind. And
Right.
then my mom sent me a photo this morning. Corn around her basically grew a foot in a week. So
Mhm.
it seems to be that the crops are liking at least these conditions.
Yeah, and we did need warmer temperatures. Now, I don't know that we needed it to be 105 in parts of southwestern Nebraska, but again, that southwest Nebraska can get pretty hot. That's not really that exceptional for them. But the thing though with we did accumulate a lot of growing degree days, so we did really start picking up some heat units that we needed. But when we talk about heat units, like generally speaking, temperatures over the low 90s are not particularly helpful. The base is considered 50 for corn and soybean, but you don't really accumulate, you don't get bonus points for being 95, 96 degrees. You don't get bonus points for being windy. But I do think on the whole, those, especially since we have gotten some rains in a lot of places the last 3 or 4 days, we're talking here on the 26th. I do think that heat probably in some cases was good. And you also do this time of year, you do want good root development. What you don't want is to have so much rain in the spring, early summer that your roots are just horizontal. They're only in the top foot and half the profile. Because then what you end up with in Minnesota last year was once you go over dry, you can't. There's no water to tap into because the roots only went down so far.
We've had some pockets of heavy, heavy rain in the last 10 days. Between, I think you said Nebraska, there was some heavy rain last night. Iowa had some. Illinois had their opportunities. What has been going on this week with moisture, and what does that mean at this time of year to have these 4 to 6 inch rain events?
It kind of depends how they come. I mean, if they're coming over a somewhat longer period of time, a matter of fact, and again, some of that's going to depend on your soil type, your land type. I actually just got a video from a farmer in the central part of the state that had 7 inches of rain last night. And he's walking around. He says, I'm not even tracking footprints because he's been really focused on soil health for the last several years, and more or less implying that he captured most of that rain. Now, I don't think if you haven't been doing that, that's probably not what the case is. You probably have some flooding. You probably have some soil erosion. But certainly we can probably imagine that at least some of that, or maybe even a good portion of that went in the ground for a lot of places. And I think that's going to be really important for setting us up as we head into pollination. Now, I think corn is at various stages around the Midwest based on when things got planted. Some people got stuff in pretty early this year. I know parts of the eastern, southern portion of Corn Belt were much more delayed. But we are getting into that really critical time of year. So I think getting this moisture is just an absolute blessing for a lot of farmers, particularly for some of the people out in central Nebraska, because they were really mired in short and long-term drought conditions. And this is the moisture they really needed. But B, they're saving money from not having to irrigate for a while. They're getting a time of year where they would maybe start thinking about turning those pivots on. They're gonna be able to keep them off for a little while, I think, which is really good news for them.
And have I noticed correctly that maybe some colors have changed in the drought monitor for Nebraska?
So the drought monitor that was released this morning was reflecting data as of Tuesday morning. So a lot of the places that currently are in severe drought actually have done very well with moisture in the last couple of days. So I do anticipate seeing some improvements. The good news, though, really, if you look around the Corn Belt and down the southern plains, there's really not a lot of drought, and there's really not any areas that have like really extreme or exceptional drought. Even the western portion of Nebraska and South Dakota have seen a lot of improvements here in the last couple of months, and I think that's really good news. So I think we have seen the rangeland conditions have improved, and I think the amount of rain they've gotten in portions of the Sandhills and portions of western South Dakota, western Nebraska, eastern Colorado, I think will at least give the warm season grasses, such that there are a good chance for having decent production. And I've listening to the Market to Market show a lot in the last several months. I've heard a couple of commentators talk about we're at 6-7 decade record lows for herd numbers. Getting these pastures improved, I think, this summer, or if not improving, certainly keeping them from getting worse, I think is critical. I think some places hopefully have seen some actual real improvement in their conditions. But yeah, looking through the main heart of the Corn Belt, there's really not a major drought concern right now. And I think that's really good news going into pollination.
Well, and I was thinking about, I know that data cutoff is a Tuesday and it comes out on a Thursday, and it rains but when you have 105-degree temperatures, 30-mile-an-hour sustained winds for 4 days, it can wipe out any of that moisture in a short amount of time. So it has been very hard for your friends there at the Drought Monitor. I know you help put that together from time to time, and
I help write the recommendation for the state. Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's a really hard job for you this year, right?
Oh yeah, it always presents its challenges, and I'm not saying the Drought Monitor is a perfect reflection of drought. It's the best thing that we can do right now, and we do really value input from farmers and ranchers. So you actually can go on. Well, first of all, I would probably say you have a good relationship with your fellow educators, extension educators that cover your area. Talk to them, tell them what's going on in your area, because they feed that information back to people like me. That is useful. So it's a very indicator driven process, but getting that local feedback can help determine which indicators are actually probably more accurately reflecting conditions on the ground. Now, granted, you could have drought stress on crops when you statistically do not have drought, and the drought monitor may not show that at all. So, I mean, there's crop stress isn't always going to match up exactly with the drought monitor. Some cases not going to match up at all, which is a problem. But I do think the authors really take pride in making sure that the map is as accurate as they can make it based on the information that they can use.
Okay, information that you can use. If you've been saying that you've been truly watching market to market for the last few weeks, like you always do, you always know that there's a few analysts that talk about years that are similar. Does this year remind you of anything? 2025. Is there another year that this is like?
There's not another year that comes to my mind that's I would think is really, really close. 2021 has some similarities. It's possible 2017 does. It's possible that we may see something that starts resembling 2020 a little bit more as we get deeper into the summer. But right now, I don't think there's a particularly good analog. I know earlier in the year I mentioned 21 and 17 and 2006. I mean, all those things I think maybe still could have some relevance, but there's not one that I would say is just like, yeah, this is exactly the same path that we're on.
Fair enough. No, none of the analysts are going to pick up on your hints then. All right, sounds good, Eric. Okay, let's wrap up what has happened. What was forecasted and what has happened? Have those things aligned yet, do you think? Any surprises?
Well, the biggest surprise to me was the amount of rain that they had in the Southern Plains this spring. That was not an expectation. I think that was an area that myself and other climatologists, I think, were thinking about being pretty dry going into the summer and having some real drought risk. So they not only are not in drought, they're very, very wet down there right now. The severe storms and the amount of precipitation they had in the mid South, the eastern portion of Corn Belt, that was an expectation. And I was saying even back in the winter that their drought was going to be a potential issue here in the western Corn Belt, but that there was going to be a path to getting moisture. And I think that we, to a certain degree, have gotten enough moisture to at least give this year's crop a chance. Now, we still got a good portion of summer to go, and I do think that there are some risks going forward that may look a bit more like 2020. I do throw 1983. I have a figure that shows 83 in here that I'll get to that in a second. But I think for the most part, things have kind of turned out sort of like we were expecting, but there have definitely been surprises like always.
Well, then let's look ahead, because one of the things is sea temperatures. That's one of those things where you look at for your first indication of what's to come. What do you see?
Sure. So just looking at the current sea surface temperature anomaly map, we are the ENSO region, the central eastern equatorial Pacific, where we look at, for El Nino, La Nina, or neutral. Like we basically are kind of in neutral conditions we have been for the spring. We are likely to remain in neutral conditions as we head through the rest of summer. There is a chance as we get into the fall that we may see La Nina redevelop. There's about a 1 in 10 chance that we go into El Nino as we head into the late fall winter. That I would say is a pretty remote chance. But what I've really been watching very carefully is then what's going on somewhat in the Atlantic, but really focused on the Pacific, the North Pacific in particular. The fact that we haven't seen that water in the Gulf of Alaska go over colder than average, at least on a widespread basis, I think is good, because that means the chances of having a long-lived ridge, upper level ridge sitting over the central United States for a good portion of summer, I think those chances are decreasing. I think that risk for that ridge is more toward the northwest, which is where we're going to see it more here the next couple of weeks. But that tends to mean this time of year that we're getting northwest flow. And in layman's terms, that means that we're going to get chances for showers and thunderstorms going through the Corn Belt, through at least the northern plains. I think that also is going to keep any significant heat waves at bay for at least the next few weeks. So right now, My prognosis for the first half of July for a lot of places in the north central U.S., including most Corn Belt, actually, I think is pretty good. I think there's going to be continued chances for moisture, like including places that still need it, like portions of Nebraska, Illinois. And I think there's going to be some warmer days, but I don't see any prolonged stretches of heat. There's a possibility that maybe around July 10th, 12th, we could actually have a 2, 3, 4 day stretch where we actually have some cooler temperatures, including overnight temperatures, which would be very, very useful during right after pollination.
Right, because it sounds like we're going to get to pollination then and get to the other side and go, hey, this is setting up pretty good, which means the weather premium disappears from the market.
That could happen. Now, granted, the corn prices, general commodity prices right now seem like they're awful low. I'm sure a lot of farmers probably would agree with that. But as I mentioned earlier, we are kind of in different places with corn development stage, probably soybean development stage, in part because there was a very wide range of experiences in getting stuff in the field this year. I know when I was popped into the studio earlier in June, Matt Bennett was on. I forget exactly what town in Illinois he was from, but I think he said he was from around Mattoon or Shelbyville, and so the
Windsor is the official town that he's from, but that's south of Champaign-Urbana.
Okay. But I know he was saying that he was in an area where if you went 10 miles north, they were done planting in late April. And if you went 10, 20 miles south, they were still trying to get a crop in, which is highly unfortunate for early June. But the High Plains Regional Climate Center has a really nifty growing degree day tool that anybody can use. And I've got a link on the slide if that's being shown
It's up
here.
now. It's up on the screen now.
Excellent. So I took a couple different points in Illinois, one near Galesburg and one near Effingham. And I assumed the planting date of like April 21st for that site, Western Illinois, because I know they were able to get the fields earlier there. Downstate, I've heard they were having some issues. So I assumed a planting date of May 30th. I'm not sure if that was remotely realistic. But if you did have a later planting date, you can see here that your soaking range is likely to be later in July versus Western Illinois. You're likely probably going to get that here in the next week or so, maybe even within the next 10 days, especially these warmer temperatures. And the areas that were able to get that crop in earlier, I think you're going to have a pretty good period for pollination and soaking. I really think the weather we'll have the moisture we need in the ground. And I think we may even have the temperatures that we want going forward. So I think that's going to be very beneficial. Now, I am concerned going forward, though, for places that did get the crop in late, that we could be putting a real stretch of heat right at pollination. So not only did you not get the crop in when you wanted, you may be getting the heat when you absolutely don't want it.
Stress at the wrong times, not just over what to put on the hot dog at the 4th of July. The Grand Forks early 95 F rule. This one, I try to pay attention, but I don't know anything about what this is.
So that just means you're a normal human being, Paul. So so they had a heat wave in the northern plains back in the first part of May, and Grand Forks had a couple 3 days in a row where they were over 95. So I say, okay, going back to 1980, what years have they hit 95 before Memorial Day? So those are 1980, 85, 87, 88, and 2006. Now, ironically enough, they haven't had that happen that much here in the last 30 years. Happened a lot in the 80s, apparently. And if you look at temperature precipitation, in a composite, you tend to be dry in the central U.S. You tend to be pretty warm in this part of the country in July. Now, not every one of those years was bad for precip. Most of them are pretty hot. But I think what that rule is basically saying is that those temperatures in the northern plains in early May is the tip of the atmosphere is doing something, meaning a strong ridge over the north central U.S. And historic precedent would suggest that if you have that in May, it usually shows up somewhere in this part of the country again in late June. It tends to show up again in July. And I do have concern as we get into the back half of July, maybe the first part of August, we may be spending more time than we would like, pretty warm. I'm a little less concerned about the faucet shutting off, at least immediately, just given that there's just so much latent moisture across a lot of the southern U.S., across a lot of the Midwest, that it wouldn't take much of any just subtle shortwave will help kick up showers of thunderstorms in the afternoon and evening hours. So I don't think we're going to go over bone dry for just a little bit. But the heat does concern me as we hit the back half of July.
And that is always the farmer will, at least the ones I know in my area of much stronger knowledge, is anything above 95 is stress. And you talked about the cool nights, you need those too. If you can stay under 95 and get cool at night, you can withstand a lot. But anytime you tick over that 95 is a problem.
It is. And actually, the temperatures at night staying, especially once you're staying well into the 70s, that really becomes a problem, because that means that you are really starting to accelerate through that reproductive stage. You want that reproductive stage to be, you want to be kind of like cooking a pork barbecue. You want it to be a slow cook. You don't want it to be, you don't want the heat on real high, because that means it's probably going to taste burnt. It's not going to be nearly as good. And, again, a lot of models right now are showing a warm, dry signal last part of July and getting into August. Now, those models have been showing that, I feel like, for quite a while. To this point, they really haven't been coming to fruition. I think there's been a real disconnect in, I think the models, especially the European models, done a pretty good job of picking up moisture in the short term, the 5 to 10 day, some cases even 2 weeks. But we really haven't seen good skill score in like the sub-seasonal time frame. So when I see these maps showing bone dry across the entire central U.S., I do take that with a little degree of skepticism, just based on that they haven't been accurate so far.
Mm-hmm.
But I am a little bit more concerned that the heat portion may be a little bit more accurate last part of July. And one of the reasons that does concern me is the Madden-Julian oscillation, which looks at where you have rising and descending motion in the tropics. So I have a figure that probably makes no sense to anybody that's normal. But I have a picture that shows that we have more rising motion being expected in the Indian Ocean, kind of that period between the 15th and 20th of July. That equates to about phases 2 and 3. And years where we tend to spend more time in phases 2 and 3 in the back half of July, there are a couple of years where 2020, 1983, if we tend to spend a lot of time in that, with the MJO being in that part of the world, what you tend to have is a decrease in what we call angular atmospheric momentum, or atmospheric angular momentum, meaning that you tend to start getting more blocking patterns. You can start building up a ridge somewhere between the Rockies and the Appalachians, or certainly somewhere on the North American continent. And there is a tendency for that to be in an area that does tend to promote more heat across the central and eastern U.S. So I do have concerns that if this forecast for where the best rising motion may be, in 3 or 4 weeks, if that's accurate, especially if that persists, then we may have a longer stretch of heat starting later in July, maybe going into August, than we would like in this part of the country. And I think those places that are going to be going to pollination later because of later planting, I do think there is a risk of seeing some yield decline there.
Especially in those behind areas. I get you. What about the rest of August?
Well, I mean, the official prognosis for August is not very good. So if you look at the CPC, they're showing warm and dry, especially Western Corn Belt. The European monthly, granted, their update was earlier in June, so I haven't seen a recent update just specifically for August. But their most recent update they had shows warm and dry over pretty much the entire Western, some of the Central Corn Belt, kind of warm everywhere. So that if that were to be true, which I'm not saying that that's going to be exactly true, but if it was, then that means that you're probably going to be having a less than ideal finish for the crops. Certainly, it's not good news for soybean, where you tend to really like that timely August precipitation. But certainly that heat would mean that we're going through a reproductive stage of corn more quickly than we would like. That probably means more overnight lows. And just because of how much moisture that we have in general around this portion of the country, I am concerned that we are going to have more nights this summer with overnight lows in the 70s, more high humidity. So I do think it's going to put more disease pressure on our crops. And I do think that may mean that we just go through things just a little bit more quickly than we would like.
Well, my energy company will be happy because,
Okay.
and the state fair. I'm going to sweat out all the good food
State
easier.
Fair is always the hottest weekend of the year. Well, not always, but it seems that way. But if we just think about what we've had in August in recent years, we really have not had uh, optimal August in a while. 2021 wasn't terrible for a lot of people, but certainly 2020 was way too dry. 2022 was terrible out our way. 23, there was some moisture, but we also had that insane heat wave. Then last year it was pretty spotty precipitation. So we look at temperature, maybe not the worst for the Corn Belt, but there's a large area that we've just been kind of drier in the last 4 or 5 August. And I just do think that there is a risk that we may start turning over a bit drier as we head into the month of August. Certainly, if we have that stretch of heat in July, we could really start zapping that moisture out of the profile. And then eventually August, that moisture starts getting drawn down more. The evapotranspiration rate starts declining a little bit. Then it means that some of those short waves that were producing more precipitation on a widespread basis gets a little bit more isolated and scattered. And that's kind of what we've seen in recent years in August. A few people do pretty well. A lot of places get mediocre, and some places are terrible for precip.
As long as it's hot for football practice, that's all my youngest wants, is it just to be hot for football because, or maybe that's me and I want that for him. I think it's one of those two. I have to figure that one out.
But there is also a possibility based on years like 2021 and 2017 and 06, I said, are precedent. So those are years that we really had some, especially 06 and to a little degree 2017, we had some real heat in this part of the country in the back half of July. But what you saw once you got into August is that ridge really retrograded off toward the west. So it planted that ridge off the coast of Washington instead of being, really confined more toward North Dakota, Minnesota. And if we get that, then we go back in northwest flow. That doesn't mean we're going to get a lot of rain. So if you're really needing a lot of rain in August, that may not be the mechanism to deliver it. But what would it do, though, is at least would deliver some more frequent chances of rain, getting the timing. It also would mean that we're going to keep the heat, at least the significant heat, away for a good portion of the month of August. So those years, actually, if you look at temperature, they average out about normal. I know 17 was cool, 21 was maybe slightly warm, but it wasn't super warm. And I think that's critical that we really, in those years, did not have like a long stretch of heat in August. And if we do have a warm back half of July, if we can turn down the heat in August, I think that would probably lead to a possibility of having pretty good yields, especially for places that have a good experience with pollination.
It's always the key. That's why we talk about it every week on Market to Market. And you talk about the weather quite often on Market Journal, Eric. And there's also a podcast that you do, or a webinar, right? People can see.
I do. I do a monthly webinar called the Second Tuesday at 9. You can get that on Crop Watch. It literally means the second Tuesday of the month. It'll get posted on Crop Watch later that day. I also have a TikTok page, or one of my interns helped me start this TikTok page last fall, and I mostly focus on Nebraska, but I do sometimes talk about more region wide. I understand that some of my colleagues in states like Iowa are not allowed to even post anything on TikTok. Now, I'm not using state-owned device. I'm doing that, but I am allowed to actually still do that here in Nebraska. So I find that a lot of farmers really appreciate the information. It's about a 3-4 minute video where I just tell you what the forecast is for the week. And sometimes it's probably pretty good. Sometimes it's probably not.
And you never know until you watch. And that's why you subscribe, follow the TikTok is NE Climate Office is how you would find Eric. And this is how we find him on the MTOM podcast, which is produced each and every Tuesday from Iowa PBS and the Market to Market TV show. Eric, thank you so much. Good to see you again, and we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for watching. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.